So, like the God of Christians, this video comes to you in 3 parts. And the first part is why Wikipedia is not always the most accurate source for contemporary figures and contemporary events, and how Wikipedia can be a positive feedback loop of bad information unintentionally, especially as somebody who sees how the meat gets made, shall we say, how the news gets manufactured. And the way that happens is like a perfect example is we'll just take a figure recently that I followed, a writer named Quinn Norton. And if you go to her Wikipedia page, you'll notice a byline, talking about in how in 2018 she was hired by the New York Times and then immediately fired after people went through her Twitter account finding that she had used LGBTQ slurs and racial slurs and was friends with a, quote, neo-Nazi. And the hyperlink for that is to a Slate article. If you look at the Slate article, it has some screenshots of her tweets, which were tweets from 2013, and you can actually see what she actually wrote. And then the rest of the Slate article goes on to talk about her friendship with Weave, who is a hacker and also a white supremacist, or now a white supremacist. But let's take this example, right? So if you are just looking up Quinn Norton, the writer, the journalist Quinn Norton, and you read this little line, you may take it at face value, and you may see the link of Slate, and think, okay, fine. But if you follow back the Slate link, read the Slate article, and then wonder where Slate got its information, well, then that's where it starts to get tricky, right? Because most media newsrooms, the press, rely on like 2 sources. If they're going to publish something, that means they have 2 independent sources of it. And the problem is, because media oftentimes scrambles all at the same, it's like dodgeball. Everybody's scrambling for, to get to the line first, to get the ball and whip it at the other person and win. And because of that, often when things are first to print or first to publish, there are inaccuracies. And then those get corrected later. But by that time, other media publishers, other newsrooms, have already run with the story. So let's say, AP or Reuters, they didn't have anything to do with Quinn Norton, but let's take AP, Associated Press, or Reuters, a news wire. First runs the story about how Quinn Norton has some, shady tweets, in her past. And then it gets written up by BuzzFeed and Vice. And, within 2 hours. And then an hour after that, then Slate picks it up and runs their article. Now, 6 hours forward in time, more people come to, let's say, Quinn Norton's defense, or more tweets get sussed out, or the tweets turn out to be responses to prior tweets because Twitter's changed their layout, so now what were tweet responses now look like tweets, etc. Or what you get is context collapse, that you forget, or the individuals forget or don't realize that the conversation that was taking place on Twitter, that where this individual said, the FAG word, I just say the word, but I'm sure YouTube would demonetize me, or use the N word, or whatever it may be, may have used it in a context that was not of a racial hatred intent, but was using it for some other purpose. But that context has been extracted out in the immediate relevancy of pushing to print by AP and Reuters, and BuzzFeed and Vice covered it, and then suddenly Slate is covering, Buzz and Vice feed, Slate is suddenly covering BuzzFeed and Vice, and so these articles get generated on top of each other, and they all start sourcing each other, and then they wind up in Wikipedia, and then Wikipedia, enough news articles and content get generated around it. Somebody will put it in the Wikipedia page, X controversy happened, but then the Wikipedia article, unless it's maintained, will remain static, and the Slate articles, or the BuzzFeed, or the Vice article, or the New York Times article, or the Associated Press wire may have had corrections to it, or added to it, or more nuances that later came out that have not trickled down to, let's say the first person, AP, Associated Press, ran with the story on the wire, and 6 hours after they ran with the story, they've added corrections to it. But by that point, BuzzFeed and Vice have already run stories on it, and 2 hours after that, and by the time of that, another hour after that, Slate has run the article based on Vice and BuzzFeed. It's Slate saying, like, well, BuzzFeed's already published this, and Vice has already published this. That's good. We got 2, news publishers. We're good to run with it. We'll run the story. And then Slate never gets around to, correcting the inaccuracies because they just don't catch it. And this happens quite frequently, One, the positive feedback loop where once a piece of news like starts to generate a little kinetic energy within press and newsrooms, everybody starts to pick it up and it generates more and 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 more, and therefore media outlets start using themselves, each other, to become like the two independent verifications. So BuzzFeed will be like, well, Vice and Vox ran on it, and Vox will suddenly be like, well, Vice and now this ran on it, and now this will be like, well, The Atlantic wrote about it, and the Associated Press is running about it, and the Associated Press is like, well, we just got our sources from one person that raised it on Twitter, and one journalist that said they had said that, but it turned out that was wrong. You get my point. It just becomes a positive feedback loop cycle that can quickly spread to inaccuracies being then generated on the Wikipedia. So, in fact, you could do this. You could artificially create, a story or like a Twitter or something. You could create a controversy on Twitter, and if you're able to get it picked up in news publications, right? Even if they later redact the story, retract the story, you may be able to source it on Wikipedia and be like, hey, here are these articles, and then you could place that information into Wikipedia if you wanted to do it maliciously, right? And Wikipedia generally would accept it because they're not monitoring. They're just looking like, okay, Slate has an article about it, or whomever has an article about it. Fine, that counts as a source, because most people, I feel like, take media and mainstream press as verified sources, when often they're just relying on each other's articles, and actually tracing down the root sources. You'll find is like, well, wait a minute, this just runs in a big circle. Anyway, that's where I'm going with how Wikipedia can be very misleading, especially for contemporary events and contemporary people, and I wouldn't trust it. And you'll notice this too if you watch interviews of people that recently come into the limelight or are talking about their Wikipedia page. You're like, oh yeah, it's all wrong. It's all misinformation, and that's often because a recent celebrity. Let's take my last video was on Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Some articles were written about Gary Vaynerchuk, and then those articles, because they were picked up by quote mainstream Digiday or whomever, they then get sourced in Wikipedia, and Digiday later goes back a month later and corrects there's certain inaccuracies, but those never get corrected by Wikipedia, because Wikipedia's hyperlink just remains static, and therefore that information is just false. Anyway, especially, and I'm not saying that it can't eventually be corrected in Wikipedia, but often the lag time can be quite large. So that's why you see a lot of contemporary people that rise in the public view be like, yeah, my Wikipedia page is totally wrong. It's just like nonsense. That's what happens. Anyway, that's just a thought for you guys. Hopefully that made sense. Maybe that was as garbled as some of the Wikipedia pages I read. But if you want to watch another video, click here or there, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.